Today we're going to learn about how to make chords using FL Studio's stamp tool. I opened up a new project and loaded Ivory, which is a piano VST, but you can use FL Keys or any other plugin that you're comfortable with. I've also purposely left the sampler, which is a blank instrument, on the channel rack, and if you don't have it, you can go to Add New Channel and click on Sampler. Let's right-click the sampler and go into Piano Roll. Up to the left here, you'll see the stamp dropdown. Now what this is just MIDI note stamps. They give you chords and scales and even percussion rolls. Let's start with scales. A very easy place to start when learning scales is the major scale and the minor natural scale. Now, before we click a stamp, let's uncheck only one and then go back into the stamp dropdown. When this option is unchecked, it'll allow us to stamp multiple times without having to come and grab the stamp again. So let's go down to minor natural and left click. We just essentially copied that stamp into the clipboard. I'm going to left click by the C note, which will paste the scale information onto the piano roll. Now what we have here is every note in the C minor natural scale, and it's C minor because the very bottom root note is on C. This would be a B minor natural scale. Let's put it back to C. And let's left click and drag it across the section we'll be working in. Now let's fill up some other octaves by clicking next to C. Scrolling up, filling up octaves, scrolling down, and filling up the octaves. Always making sure that our bottom note is next to the C note. These will be our guidelines for composing when we're working in the actual piano. Now let's go back up to the target channel dropdown and click on the piano VST. Now we can see all the lightly highlighted guidelines while we compose. If you can't see these guidelines, just go up to piano roll options, helpers, ghost channels. So if you head back up to the stamp dropdown, we're going to be working with two different types of chords, major and minor. Click on the minor stamp, and now we have a minor triad chord that we can stamp on the piano roll by the C note, C being our very lowest and root note. Let's left click and shorten this because we're going to be adding more chords. A triad chord is just 3 notes. I'm going to turn the velocity down on this chord so that it's not as loud. Next, we're going to add another minor chord. We're going to grab the root note, the very bottom of that chord, and drag it up to the next note in the highlighted scale. But as you can see, not every note is in the scale. So we're not going to leave it there. We're going to keep going until every note is in the scale. This one isn't, so we're going to keep going. And there, we have our second minor chord in the scale now. We're going to add another minor chord, and then we're going to drag up. And there's our third and last minor chord in the scale. We're going to go back to our stamp dropdown and grab a major chord. Now let's start back at C, and obviously C minor is already taken, so there isn't going to be a C major. So let's go up to D, and that note doesn't fit in the scale, so we'll go up. And there's our first major chord in the scale, D sharp major. Put in another major chord and drag up. This one doesn't fit in the scale, and we already have an F minor, so keep going. The same case here, there's a G minor, so there won't be a G major, so go up again. And there is a G sharp major. There's going to be one more major chord, and it's the next one up. Now you can see here that the root note of our last chord is on an A sharp. And we don't have another note left in the scale before the octave actually starts over again at C. So we've successfully added every minor and major triad chord in the C minor natural scale. Let's clear out the stamp tool by clicking on None or hitting Shift N. Now we can draw individual notes. If you go up to the playback tool or Shift Y, you get this tool that can play any MIDI information by left clicking. So now that we have all the chords laid out, we can use this tool to creatively find a chord progression that we want to use in the song. So now just left click around and try to find something that sounds good to you. That one sounds good. I like it. I'm going to hit Shift B to go back to the paintbrush tool. Then I'll hold down Control on my keyboard and scroll down on my mouse wheel. This will zoom us out. You can also grab the scroll bar at the top for the same effect. Now I'll hit Control A to select all. Then I'll hit Alt G, which will ungroup all these chords so that we can individually edit the notes. While it's still selected, I'm just going to drag it over and out of the space that we're going to continue creating in. So while remembering my chord progression, I'm going to highlight my first chord by holding Control on the keyboard and left clicking and dragging to highlight. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and hold left click to copy and drag over my first chord. I'll extend the length of the chord, and with the metronome on, I'll try to match the rhythm of the chord progression I came up with. That sounds good. So I'll grab my second chord. Third chord. Okay, so we just created a chord progression. So this will be the foundation of your song. This song is in the key of C minor natural. We're using 3 minor chords and 1 major chord. They all fit well together in the key because we used our guidelines to make sure that they were the correct chords. Before I wrap up this video, I'd like to point out a few things. Something interesting to remember is that starting at your root note, every note in the chord skips 1 note in the scale. So in other words, these triad chords, whether minor or major, are composed using every other note in the scale as you climb up. For example, we have G, skip G sharp and then go to A sharp. Skip C and go to D. Every other note in the scale. So it's just another trick to use when making chords, especially when you're not using stamps. Secondly, there's plenty of other chords in addition to major and minor triads. You can see them here. It does get more complicated, but just to touch on a few, we have minor sevenths and minor ninths. And you can achieve those chords by just adding the 7th and the 9th note to a minor triad chord. Our root note C being the first note of the chord, 2nd and 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. So 7 and 9. I'll delete those for now. There's also inverted chords, and that's by taking notes from the bottom or the top and moving them up or down an octave. After highlighting a note, if you hold Control and you hit the up arrow on your keyboard, you'll move that note up an octave. So that's one variation of an inverted chord. And one reason you might want to do this is to keep your chords closer to each other on the scale so that they have a similar texture, as lower notes and higher notes can have dramatically different textures to them. And also, it's just another way to keep your chord progressions sounding interesting and unique. So as another example, I could take this D sharp and move it down an octave. So now that you have this chord progression laid out and your guidelines are all still in place, everything is set up for you to start producing melodies for other instruments. So all you need to do is play single notes rhythmically across the grid while staying within the guidelines. Definitely use your ears to hear what fits best with your chord progression, and then you'll be on your way to making music that's in key and sounding great. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please like and subscribe. I'll catch you guys next time.